had light. Final notice 48 hours to vacate. Her dream was crumbling around her, and tomorrow she would have to tell her 3 employees they no longer had jobs. The cafe that had been her life's work for 5 years was about to become just another empty storefront on Maple Street. She folded the notice and placed it beside the cash register, then began her nightly closing routine one last time. The chairs were already stacked on tables, the floor swept clean. The coffee machines were turned off and wiped down. Everything was ready for what might be her final night as owner of Sunrise Café. The sound of knocking on the front door made her jump. She glanced at the clock above the counter, 11:47 p.m. Who could possibly want coffee at this hour? She walked to the door, peering through the glass at a tall, well-dressed white man in an expensive suit. His dark hair was slightly messy, as if he had been running his hands through it, and his green eyes looked urgent. "We're closed," she called through the glass. "Please," he said, his voice muffled but sincere. "I need to speak with you. It's Jonathan Pierce. I've been coming here for weeks." Simone recognized him now. The quiet man who ordered black coffee every morning at exactly 7:30 a.m. and always left a generous tip. He never caused trouble, always said please and thank you. She had wondered about him, noticed his expensive clothes and the way he seemed to carry the weight of important decisions on his shoulders. Against her better judgment, she turned the lock and opened the door just enough to speak to him properly. "Mr. Pierce, right? I remember you. But we really are closed and I have to finish cleaning up." "I know what's happening to your cafe," he said quickly. "I know about the rent increase and the eviction notice. I know you're going to lose this place in 2 days." Simone's heart stopped. "How do you?" "Because I've been watching you work every day for 3 weeks. I've seen how much this place means to you and to the people who come here. I've seen the joy on customers' faces when they taste your coffee and eat your homemade pastries. I've watched you remember everyone's names and their usual orders. This cafe is special and you're about to lose it." She opened the door wider, suddenly too tired to maintain her guard. "Yes, I am. The landlord raised my rent by 60% with only 30 days' notice. I can't afford it. I've tried everything, applied for every loan, asked every friend and family member for help. There's nothing left to do." Jonathan stepped inside when she gestured for him to enter. The cafe felt different at night, more intimate somehow. The usual bustle and chatter were gone, replaced by a quiet that felt both peaceful and sad. "What if I told you there was another way?" he asked softly. "I'd say you don't understand how expensive commercial rent is in this neighborhood," Simone replied, attempting a weak smile. "Unless you happen to have $50,000 lying around, I don't see how you could help." Jonathan was quiet for a moment, studying her face in the dim light. "Actually, I do. And I'd like to help you save this place." Simone stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "I said I have the money and I want to help you. But first, I need you to sit down and listen to what I have to propose. Will you do that? Are you feeling the tension yet? Can you imagine being in Simone's shoes, facing the loss of everything you've worked for, when suddenly a stranger offers hope? If this story is pulling at your heartstrings, please subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think Simone should do. Would you trust this mysterious offer? Simone looked around her cafe, at the painted walls she had chosen herself, at the mismatched furniture she had collected from thrift stores and garage sales, at the chalkboard menu written in her own careful handwriting. This place was more than a business to her. It was her heart, her home, her proof that she could build something beautiful and meaningful. "Okay," she said finally, pulling down 2 chairs from the nearest table. "I'll listen." They sat across from each other, and Jonathan leaned forward with his hands clasped together. "My name is Jonathan Pierce, and I'm the CEO of Pierce Development Corporation. We build commercial properties all over the city." Simone's eyes widened. She had heard of Pierce Development. They were one of the biggest companies in the state. "The thing is," Jonathan continued, "I've been successful in business, but I've never found a place that felt like home until I started coming here. Your cafe represents everything I believe community should be. It's warm, welcoming, and real. The people who come here aren't just customers, they're neighbors. You've created something special, and I don't want to see it disappear." "That's very kind of you to say," Simone said carefully, "but I still don't understand how you can help." "I want to become your business partner," Jonathan said simply. "I'll provide the capital to pay your back rent, cover the increased monthly rent for the next 2 years, and fund renovations and upgrades. In exchange, I'd like to own 30% of the business and have input on major decisions. You would remain the majority owner and the heart of this place." Simone felt dizzy. "You want to give me money to save my cafe?" "I want to invest in something that matters. I've spent my whole career building empty office buildings and shopping centers. I want to be part of something that brings people together instead of just generating profit. She studied his face, looking for signs of deception or hidden motives. All she saw was sincerity and hope. Why would you do this for someone you barely know? Because sometimes you meet a person or find a place that changes how you see the world. This cafe has done that for me. The way you treat people, the care you put into everything you make, the community you've built, it's shown me what I've been missing in my own life. Simone felt tears starting to form again, but these were different from the tears of despair she had been holding back all evening. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of the first real hope she had felt in months. You would really do this? She whispered. If you'll let me, yes. I know it's a lot to process, especially at midnight when you're exhausted and scared. But I couldn't let another day pass without making this offer. I couldn't let you lose this place without trying to help. Simone looked around the cafe again, but this time she didn't see endings. She saw possibilities. She saw her dream continuing, growing, becoming even better than before. Yes, she said, her voice growing stronger. Yes, I accept your offer. Thank you, Mr. Pierce. Thank you for giving me hope when I had none left. Jonathan smiled, and Simone noticed how it transformed his entire face. Please call me Jonathan. And thank you, Simone, for letting me be part of something beautiful. As they sat in her cafe at nearly midnight, surrounded by the lingering aroma of coffee and fresh pastries, both of them felt something shift in their lives. Neither could have predicted that a simple morning coffee routine would lead to this moment, this offer, this new beginning. So, Simone said, what happens next? Next we save your cafe, Jonathan replied. And maybe we discover that the best things in life really do happen when you least expect them. 3 weeks earlier, Jonathan Pierce had been having the worst morning of his professional life. He sat in his corner office on the 40th floor of downtown's tallest building, staring at architectural plans that represented millions of dollars and months of work. The city planning committee had just rejected his proposal for a new shopping complex, citing concerns about traffic and environmental impact. His assistant knocked and entered with yet another stack of documents requiring his signature. The morning meeting with the Johnson Group has been moved to 10:30, she said efficiently. And your father called. He wants to discuss the quarterly report. Jonathan nodded absently. At 34, he had spent the last 10 years building Pierce Development into one of the most successful companies in the region. He should have felt proud, accomplished. Instead, he felt empty. Every building was just another structure. Every project just another number in a financial report. I need coffee, he announced, standing up from his desk. I'm going out for a walk. Sir, you have a coffee machine right here, his assistant reminded him. I need real coffee, he said, grabbing his jacket. Cancel my 10 o'clock. I'll be back for the Johnson meeting. Jonathan left his office building and walked the streets of downtown, something he rarely did anymore. He usually traveled by car from his penthouse apartment to his office to whatever restaurant or hotel was hosting his business meetings. Walking gave him a different perspective on the city he was helping to shape. 2 blocks from his office, he found himself on Maple Street, a row of small businesses and older buildings that had somehow survived the wave of development that had transformed most of downtown. There was a vintage bookstore, a flower shop, a small restaurant, and at the end of the block, a cafe with a hand-painted sign that read Sunrise Café. The large windows showed a warm, inviting interior with mismatched tables and chairs, local artwork on the walls, and plants growing in painted pots. Through the glass, he could see a beautiful African-American woman behind the counter, smiling as she handed a cup to a customer. She had natural hair that caught the morning light, warm brown eyes, and the kind of genuine smile that seemed to light up the entire space. Jonathan pushed open the door and was immediately hit by the rich aroma of freshly roasted coffee and something sweet baking in the oven. The sound of conversation and laughter filled the air. People weren't just grabbing coffee and leaving, they were sitting, talking, reading, working on laptops. Children colored in coloring books while their parents chatted with other customers. Good morning, the woman behind the counter said, her voice warm and welcoming. I don't think I've seen you here before. I'm Simone. What can I get you today? Jonathan approached the counter, suddenly feeling underdressed despite his expensive suit. Everyone else in the cafe seemed so relaxed, so comfortable. Just black coffee, please. Large. We have 3 different roasts available, Simone explained, pointing to a small chalkboard behind her. The house blend is smooth and mild, the dark roast has more bite, and we have a single origin Colombian that's absolutely fantastic. It's my personal favorite. I'll try the Colombian, Jonathan said, impressed by her knowledge and enthusiasm. Simone moved with practiced efficiency, grinding beans and operating an espresso machine that looked well used but well maintained. "Are you new to the neighborhood?" she asked as she worked. "I work nearby," Jonathan replied, not wanting to get into details about his company or his role in the development that was changing the area. "This is a nice place." "Thank you. I opened it 5 years ago. It took me 3 years to save enough money, and another year to find the perfect location. I wanted to create a space where people could slow down, connect with each other, enjoy really good coffee and food made with care." She handed him his cup and he took a sip. The coffee was exceptional, rich and complex with notes of chocolate and caramel. It was better than anything he'd had at expensive restaurants or exclusive hotels. "This is incredible," he said, meaning it. Simone's face lit up with pride. "Thank you. I sourced the beans directly from a cooperative in Colombia. It costs more than buying from a distributor, but it means the farmers get fair wages and the quality is so much better." Jonathan looked around the cafe again, seeing it with new eyes. This wasn't just a business, it was a community gathering place. At one table, an elderly man was teaching a young boy to play chess. At another, 2 women were sharing pictures on their phones and laughing. A group of college students had spread textbooks across a large table, studying together. "How much do I owe you?" he asked. $3.50, Simone said, and Jonathan noticed she didn't ask if he wanted to leave a tip on the card reader. He pulled out his wallet and gave her a $20 bill. "Keep the change," he said. Simone looked surprised. "That's very generous, but—" "Great coffee deserves great appreciation," Jonathan said simply. He found an empty table by the window and sat down to drink his coffee and observe the life happening around him. He had expected to stay for 10 minutes and hurry back to his office. Instead, he found himself lingering, watching Simone interact with customers, noticing how she remembered everyone's names and orders, how she asked about their families and jobs and really listened to their answers. When he finally returned to his office 45 minutes later, his assistant looked concerned. "Sir, the Johnson meeting?" "Reschedule it," Jonathan said. "And clear my morning calendar for tomorrow at 7:30. "Yes, sir." "May I ask why?" "I found my new coffee shop," Jonathan replied, already looking forward to returning to Sunrise Café the next morning. That evening, as Jonathan sat in his empty penthouse apartment eating takeout from an expensive restaurant, he thought about the warmth and life he had experienced in Simone's cafe. For the first time in years, he was excited about something that had nothing to do with profit margins or development deals. The next morning at exactly 7:30 a.m., Jonathan walked into Sunrise Café again. Simone was behind the counter, arranging fresh pastries in the display case. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. "You came back," she said, sounding pleased. "Colombian coffee again?" "Please," Jonathan said, impressed that she remembered his order. "I'm glad you enjoyed it yesterday. I was hoping you would become one of our regulars." As she prepared his coffee, Jonathan found himself studying her face, the way she moved with confidence and grace, the genuine warmth in her expression. He had met countless people in his business life, but rarely anyone who seemed so comfortable in their own skin, so genuinely happy with what they were doing. "Here you go," she said, handing him his coffee. "I hope your day is wonderful." "It's off to a good start," Jonathan replied, meaning it more than she could know. This time he stayed for 20 minutes, reading the newspaper and listening to the conversations around him. An older woman named Mrs. Chen was telling Simone about her grandson's graduation. A young father was getting advice from other parents about potty training. A college student was asking Simone's opinion about different study spots in the cafe. When Jonathan left, he realized he was smiling. He couldn't remember the last time his morning had felt so normal, so human. He came back the next day and the day after that. By the end of the week, Simone greeted him by name and had his coffee ready before he reached the counter. "You're very punctual," she observed on Friday morning. 7:30 exactly every day. "I like routine," Jonathan said. "And I like your coffee." "Well, I like having reliable customers," Simone replied. "It helps me plan my morning prep." As Jonathan walked to his usual table, he overheard Simone telling another customer about the different local artists whose work was displayed on the cafe walls, how she rotated the exhibitions monthly to give emerging artists exposure. She talked about the book club that met on Wednesday evenings and the acoustic music nights she hosted on Fridays. Jonathan realized that in just 1 week, he had learned more about community and human connection from watching Simone than he had in years of business networking. She wasn't just serving coffee, she was creating a place where people belonged. By the end of his second week as a regular customer, Jonathan found himself looking forward to his morning visit to Sunrise Café more than any other part of his day. It had become the bright spot in his routine, the moment when he felt most like himself rather than like the CEO everyone expected him to be. He began to notice things about the cafe that revealed both its charm and its challenges. The equipment was older but well maintained. The furniture was mismatched but comfortable. The decorations were clearly done on a budget but with incredible creativity and taste. Most importantly, he noticed Simone. Her passion for what she did, her genuine care for every customer, her ability to create warmth and community in a world that often felt cold and disconnected. Jonathan didn't know it yet, but he was falling in love. Not just with the cafe but with the remarkable woman who had created it and the life she represented. A life built on purpose, connection, and the belief that small acts of kindness could make the world a better place. By the beginning of his third week at Sunrise Café, Jonathan had become such a regular that other customers started to recognize him. The elderly man who played chess with his grandson nodded politely when Jonathan walked in each morning. The college students had begun including him in their debates about local politics and social issues. Mrs. Chin always asked about his work, though he kept his answers vague. "You know," Simone said on Monday morning as she prepared his usual Colombian coffee, "I still don't know what you do for a living. You're always dressed so nicely, but you never seem stressed about getting to work on time." Jonathan hesitated. He had been dreading this question because he wasn't sure how Simone would react to learning he was part of the development industry that was changing her neighborhood. "I work in commercial real estate," he said finally, which was technically true without being complete. "That sounds interesting," Simone said, handing him his coffee. "Are you involved in any of the new construction happening downtown?" "Some of it," Jonathan replied carefully. "It's amazing how much the city is changing," Simone continued, wiping down the counter. "Some of it is good, I suppose. More jobs, more housing. But I worry about small businesses like mine getting pushed out by higher rents and big chain stores." Jonathan felt a knot form in his stomach. His company was responsible for some of those changes. "Do you think about expanding?" he asked, trying to change the subject slightly. "Opening a second location?" Simone laughed, but not in a happy way. "I can barely afford to keep this location open. The rent has gone up every year since I opened, and it's getting harder to compete with the big coffee chains that can afford prime real estate and massive advertising budgets." "But you offer something they don't," Jonathan said earnestly. "Personal service, community, quality. I appreciate that, I really do. But caring doesn't always pay the bills." Simone's expression grew more serious. "I love this place more than anything, but some days I wonder how long I can keep it going." Jonathan wanted to tell her right then that money didn't have to be a problem, that he could help, that her cafe was too important to lose. But he knew she would be suspicious of such an offer from someone she had known for only 2 weeks. Instead, he spent longer in the cafe that morning, buying a pastry and staying to read rather than hurrying to his office. He watched Simone work, noticed how she put extra care into every cup of coffee, how she remembered details about customers' lives, how she solved small problems with creativity and resourcefulness. When Mrs. Chin mentioned that her arthritis was bothering her, Simone brought her a cushion for her chair without being asked. When the college student's laptop battery died, she had a charging station ready behind the counter. When a mother came in with a crying baby, Simone offered to warm up the bottle and provided a quiet corner table. "You're very good at this," Jonathan said when he brought his empty cup to the counter. "At making coffee?" Simone asked. "At making people feel cared for," Jonathan replied. Simone smiled, and Jonathan felt that familiar warmth spread through his chest. "That's the whole point, isn't it? Life is hard enough without people treating each other like strangers." On Tuesday, Jonathan arrived to find Simone looking frustrated as she worked with the espresso machine. It was making strange noises and producing weak, inconsistent shots. "Equipment problems?" he asked. "This machine is 12 years old," Simone said, giving it a gentle pat. "I bought it used when I opened and it's been faithful, but I think it's finally starting to give up on me." "What will you do if it breaks completely?" "Hope it doesn't happen until I can save enough to replace it. A good commercial espresso machine costs $15,000 or more. That might as well be $1 million right now." Jonathan made a mental note and spent his morning researching commercial coffee equipment on his phone. By afternoon, he had learned enough to have an intelligent conversation about espresso machines, grinders, and brewing techniques. Wednesday morning, he brought up the subject casually. "I was thinking about what you said about your espresso machine. Have you looked into refurbished equipment? There are companies that restore commercial machines to like new condition for about half the cost." Simone's eyes lit up with interest. "Really? I hadn't thought of that. Do you know anything about coffee equipment? I've been learning, Jonathan said, which was true. I could send you some information if you'd like. That would be wonderful. Thank you. Jonathan spent his lunch break researching reputable equipment dealers and financing options. He emailed Simone a list of resources, carefully avoiding anything that might seem too generous or suspicious. Thursday morning, Simone greeted him with excitement. I called 3 of those companies you suggested. One of them has a restored machine that would be perfect for the cafe, and they offer payment plans. I never knew these options existed. I'm glad I could help, Jonathan said, meaning it deeply. You've been so kind to me, Simone said. Most customers just order coffee and leave. You actually listen and care about what happens here. This place has become important to me, Jonathan said honestly. Friday evening, Jonathan made a decision that surprised even him. Instead of going to his usual expensive restaurant, he stayed at the cafe for the weekly acoustic music night. He had heard Simone mention it several times but had never stayed to experience it. The cafe was transformed in the evening. The harsh fluorescent lights were replaced by warm lamplight and candles. About 30 people filled the space, sitting on chairs, couches, and even on the floor. A young woman with a guitar sat on a small makeshift stage in the corner, singing folk songs with a voice that was both powerful and tender. Simone moved through the crowd, serving coffee, tea, and homemade desserts. She had changed from her usual work clothes into a flowing skirt and soft sweater that made her look even more beautiful. When she noticed Jonathan sitting alone at a table near the back, her face showed genuine surprise and pleasure. You stayed, she said, approaching his table during a break between songs. I wanted to see what I've been missing, Jonathan replied. What do you think? Jonathan looked around the room at people of all ages enjoying music together, sharing conversation, creating community. I think this is what the world should look like more often. Simone sat down across from him. That's exactly why I started doing these nights. People need places to come together to share something beautiful. We're all so isolated these days, living in our own digital bubbles. Music has a way of breaking down barriers. How did you learn to create all this? Jonathan asked. The cafe, the community events, the way you bring people together? I grew up in a house where our door was always open, Simone said. My grandmother used to say that food and kindness were the 2 things that could solve most of the world's problems. She taught me that creating space for people to feel welcome and valued was one of the most important things you could do with your life. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. She died 2 years ago, but I still hear her voice when I'm making decisions about the cafe. She would have loved seeing all these people together tonight. Jonathan felt a deep longing as he listened to Simone talk about her grandmother and her philosophy of life. He had grown up in a world of business dinners and networking events, where relationships were primarily transactional. The idea of opening your door to welcome strangers, of using food and kindness to solve problems, was completely foreign to his experience. I envy you, he said quietly. Why? You know who you are and what matters to you. You've built something meaningful. Simone studied his face in the candlelight. What about you? What matters to you? Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. I'm still figuring that out, he said finally. The music began again, and they listened together in comfortable silence. Jonathan found himself stealing glances at Simone, watching her face as she enjoyed the performance, noticing how she nodded encouragingly at the musician and smiled at other audience members. When the evening ended and the last customers had left, Jonathan helped Simone stack chairs and clean up. You don't have to do that, she protested. I want to help, Jonathan said simply. As they worked together, Jonathan realized that he felt more at peace in this small cafe at 11 p.m. than he ever felt in his penthouse apartment or corner office. Simone hummed softly as she wiped down tables, and the sound made him feel something he hadn't experienced in years, contentment. Thank you for staying tonight, Simone said as they finished cleaning. It means a lot to have people who really appreciate what we're trying to do here. Thank you for creating a place where people like me can remember what community feels like, Jonathan replied. As he walked home through the quiet streets, Jonathan knew that something fundamental had shifted in his life. He was no longer just a regular customer at Sunrise Café. He was someone who cared deeply about what happened to this place and to the remarkable woman who had created it. He was falling in love, and for the first time in his adult life he was falling in love with something that mattered more than success or profit or the approval of others. He was falling in love with kindness, with community, with the possibility of building a life that served something greater than himself. The question was, what was he willing to do to protect it? Monday morning arrived with an unwelcome surprise at Sunrise Café. Simone stood behind the counter at 6 a.m., staring at an official letter that had been slipped under the door sometime during the night. Her hands shook slightly as she read the contents for the third time. Notice of rent increase. Effective in 30 days, your monthly rent will increase from $3,200 to $5,120 per month. 60%. The landlord was raising her rent by 60% with only 30 days' notice. Simone sank into one of the cafe chairs, the letter still in her hands. She had been struggling to make her current rent payments. The increase would be impossible to manage. Even if she raised all her prices significantly and somehow doubled her customer base overnight, she couldn't generate enough revenue to cover such an enormous increase. The front door chimed and her first customer of the day entered. Simone quickly folded the letter and put it in her apron pocket, forcing a smile as she stood to greet Mrs. Chen. "Good morning, dear," the older woman said cheerfully. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Good morning, Mrs. Chen." "The usual? Earl Grey tea with honey?" "You know me too well," Mrs. Chen replied, settling into her favorite chair by the window. Simone went through the motions of preparing tea, but her mind was racing. 30 days. She had 30 days to figure out how to nearly double her income or find a new location or, what? Give up the dream that had sustained her for 5 years? More customers began arriving for the morning rush. Simone served them with her usual warmth, but inside she felt like she was drowning. She kept checking the clock, looking forward to 7:30 when Jonathan would arrive. His presence had become a source of stability in her daily routine, and today she needed that comfort more than ever. At exactly 7:30, Jonathan walked through the door. Simone had his Colombian coffee ready before he reached the counter, but when she handed it to him, her smile felt forced. "Everything okay?" Jonathan asked, studying her face with concern. Simone hesitated. She had always kept her financial worries private, not wanting to burden customers with her problems. But something about Jonathan's genuine concern made her want to tell the truth. "Actually no," she said quietly. "I got some bad news this morning." "What happened?" Simone glanced around the cafe. Other customers were waiting for service, and this wasn't the right time for a detailed conversation. "I'll tell you later if that's okay. Right now I need to focus on the morning rush." Jonathan nodded. "Of course. I'll be here when things slow down." For the next hour, Simone worked with mechanical efficiency. She made coffee, served pastries, took orders, and made small talk with customers while her mind spun with calculations and increasingly desperate scenarios. Could she get a second job? Could she find a business partner? Could she convince the landlord to reconsider? When the morning rush finally ended and only a few customers remained, Jonathan approached the counter again. "Now can you tell me what's wrong?" he asked gently. Simone pulled the letter from her apron pocket and handed it to him. "My landlord is raising the rent by 60%. I have 30 days. Jonathan read the letter, his expression growing darker with each line. "This is outrageous," he said finally. 60% with 30 days notice? That's barely legal." "Barely legal is still legal," Simone replied with a bitter laugh. "And even if I fought it, I don't have money for lawyers." "What are you going to do?" "I honestly don't know. I've been running numbers in my head all morning, and there's no scenario where I can afford this increase. Even if I raised my prices by 50%, I'd lose customers and still come up short." Jonathan was quiet for a moment, studying the letter. "Who's your landlord?" "Morrison Property Management. They bought the building 6 months ago from the previous owner, who had kept my rent reasonable for 5 years. "Morrison," Jonathan repeated, and Simone noticed something change in his expression. "You know them?" "I've heard the name. They're known for this kind of thing. They buy older buildings in developing neighborhoods, force out existing tenants with massive rent increases, then lease to chain stores that can afford higher rates." Simone felt her heart sink even further. So this was planned. They never intended to let me stay. Probably not. But Simone, there might be options you haven't considered. Like what? Jonathan seemed to be choosing his words carefully. Like finding an investor. Someone who believes in what you're doing here and wants to help you continue. I've tried banks, credit unions, small business loan programs. My credit isn't bad, but I don't have enough collateral for the kind of money I'd need. I'm not talking about traditional lending. I'm talking about someone who would become a partner in the business. Simone looked at him curiously. "Do you know someone who might be interested in investing in a small cafe?" "Maybe," Jonathan said. "Would you be open to that kind of arrangement?" "At this point, I'm open to anything that would let me keep this place running." The door chimed as new customers entered, ending their conversation for the moment. But Simone found herself thinking about Jonathan's suggestion throughout the rest of the morning. A business partner could solve her immediate financial crisis, but it would also mean giving up some control over the cafe that meant everything to her. During her lunch break, she walked around the neighborhood, looking at empty storefronts that had once housed other small businesses. A family-owned restaurant that had been there for 20 years was now a Starbucks. A bookstore that had hosted author readings and children's story time was now a chain clothing store. A flower shop where she had bought arrangements for the cafe was now a cell phone store. Was this the inevitable future? Would all the unique, personal businesses be replaced by chain stores with corporate headquarters in distant cities? Simone returned to the cafe feeling more determined than ever to find a way to save her business. As she prepared for the afternoon customers, she thought about Jonathan's suggestion. If he really did know someone who might invest, it could be her only option. The afternoon passed slowly. Simone found herself distracted, making small errors and having to remake drinks. Her regulars noticed her unusual distraction and asked if she was feeling well. She assured them she was fine, but inside she felt anything but fine. At closing time, she sat alone in the cafe doing calculations on a legal pad. No matter how she adjusted the numbers, the math didn't work. Even with a partner providing capital, the new rent would consume most of the cafe's revenue, leaving little money for supplies, wages, or improvements. Her phone rang. It was her sister calling from Atlanta. "Hey, how's business?" her sister asked cheerfully. Simone almost told her the truth, but she couldn't bring herself to say the words out loud yet. "It's fine. How are the kids?" They chatted for 20 minutes about family matters, but when they hung up, Simone felt even more alone. Her family was supportive, but they were far away and dealing with their own financial challenges. She couldn't ask them for help. She locked up the cafe and walked home to her small apartment, the rent increase letter still in her pocket. For the first time since opening Sunrise Cafe, she seriously considered what her life would be like without it. She could get a job at another cafe, but it wouldn't be the same as creating her own community space. She could move to a less expensive city, but she had built her whole life around this neighborhood. She could start over, but the idea of beginning again at 31 felt overwhelming. That night, Simone lay awake staring at the ceiling, running through possibilities and scenarios until her head ached. She had worked so hard to build something beautiful and meaningful. She had proven that a small business could thrive through quality, community, and genuine care for customers. Was it all going to end because of corporate greed and a broken system that prioritized profit over community? As she finally drifted off to sleep, Simone made a decision. Tomorrow she would ask Jonathan about his investor contact. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. If there was any chance to save the cafe, she had to take it. She didn't know that just a few miles away, Jonathan was lying awake in his penthouse, thinking about the same problem. He had spent the evening researching Morrison Property Management and confirming his suspicions about their business practices. They were systematically destroying the character of neighborhoods by displacing small businesses. Jonathan had the power to stop what was happening to Simone, but he wasn't sure she would accept help from him if she knew the full truth about who he was and what he could do. Tomorrow he would have to decide how much of himself he was willing to reveal to save the woman and the place that had changed his life. Both of them fell asleep knowing that the next day would determine the future of everything that mattered most to them. Tuesday morning felt different from the moment Simone unlocked the cafe door. She had made a decision during her sleepless night, and though it scared her, she felt relieved to have a plan. When Jonathan arrived at his usual time, she was ready. "Colombian coffee?" she asked, though she had already started preparing it. "Please," Jonathan said, studying her face. "You look like you didn't sleep much. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday. About finding an investor." Simone handed him his coffee, her hands steadier than they had been the day before. "If you really do know someone who might be interested, I'd like to meet them." Jonathan was quiet for a moment, holding his coffee cup without drinking from it. "Actually, there's something I need to tell you first. Something I should have told you weeks ago." Simone felt a flutter of anxiety. "What is it? Can we sit down? This might take a few minutes." They moved to Jonathan's usual table by the window. The morning rush hadn't started yet, so they had relative privacy. Jonathan set down his coffee and looked directly at Simone. "When you asked about my work, I told you I was in commercial real estate. That's true, but it's not the whole truth." Simone waited, sensing that whatever he was about to say was important. "I'm the CEO of Pierce Development Corporation," Jonathan said quietly. Simone's eyes widened. Everyone in the city knew Pierce Development. They were responsible for most of the new construction downtown, including several projects that had displaced older businesses. You're telling me you're? She paused, trying to process this information. You're one of the people changing this neighborhood. Yes, Jonathan said simply. And I know how that must sound, especially given what's happening with your rent. Simone leaned back in her chair, studying his face as if seeing him for the first time. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I was afraid you'd stop talking to me. I was afraid you'd see me as part of the problem instead of someone who cares about what happens to this place. Are you part of the problem? Simone asked directly. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, considering her question seriously. I have been, yes. For 10 years, I've built shopping centers and office complexes without thinking much about the communities they affected. I've focused on profit and growth without considering what was lost in the process. And now I understand what I've been missing. Coming here every morning, watching you create community, seeing how much this place means to people. It's changed how I think about everything. Simone absorbed this information, her mind racing. So when you suggested finding an investor, I was talking about myself, Jonathan said. I want to help you save the cafe. Not as a business deal or a tax write-off, but because this place has shown me what development should really be about. Building communities, not just buildings. You want to invest in my cafe? I want to become your partner if you'll have me. I can provide the capital to pay the rent increase and fund improvements. You would remain the majority owner and maintain complete creative control. I'd be a silent partner, contributing money and business expertise while you continue to run the daily operations. Simone stared at him, trying to understand the implications of what he was offering. How much money are we talking about? Enough to cover the rent increase for the next 5 years, plus money for equipment upgrades, marketing, and a cash reserve for unexpected expenses. We're talking about roughly $500,000. Simone felt dizzy. That's more money than I've made in the entire 5 years I've been open. It's less money than I spend on a single small development project. For me, it's a reasonable investment. For you, it would mean the difference between keeping your dream alive and losing everything. The door chimed as Mrs. Chen entered for her morning tea. Simone excused herself to serve her regular customer, but her hands were shaking as she prepared the Earl Grey. Are you all right, dear? Mrs. Chen asked with concern. Just a bit tired, Simone replied, forcing a smile. How are you today? While she served Mrs. Chen and 2 other early customers, Simone's mind spun with questions and doubts. Could she trust Jonathan? Was this offer too good to be true? What did he really want from her? When the customers were settled, she returned to the table where Jonathan waited patiently. I need to ask you something, she said, sitting down across from him. Why would you do this? Really? I mean, you barely know me. Jonathan considered his answer carefully. Do you remember what you said Friday night about your grandmother teaching you that food and kindness could solve most of the world's problems? Yes. I grew up in a world where people believed that money and power could solve problems. My father taught me that business was about winning, about coming out ahead, about accumulating more than the other guy. Success was measured by how much you owned and how much control you had. Jonathan paused, looking around the cafe at the artwork on the walls, the comfortable furniture, the plants in the windows. But coming here every morning for 3 weeks has taught me something different. I've watched you solve problems with kindness. I've seen you create wealth that can't be measured in dollars. Community, belonging, connection, joy. These are things my business education never taught me were valuable. So this is about your education? Simone asked skeptically. No, Jonathan said firmly. This is about the fact that you've shown me a better way to live. This cafe represents everything I want to be part of and nothing I want to destroy. Helping you save it isn't charity or guilt. It's the smartest investment I could make in my own future. Simone studied his face, looking for signs of deception or hidden motives. What she saw was sincerity, vulnerability, and something that looked like hope. If I said yes, she said slowly, what would that look like practically? We'd form a legal partnership. I'd provide capital in exchange for a minority stake in the business. You'd have final say on all decisions about menu, pricing, staffing, and daily operations. I'd have input on major financial decisions and expansion plans. Expansion. If this cafe succeeds, and I believe it will, there might be opportunities to open additional locations or launch related businesses. But only if that's something you want to do. Simone felt overwhelmed by the possibilities he was describing. I need time to think about this. Of course, this is a huge decision. Take all the time you need. How much time do I have? Jonathan smiled ruefully. Well, your rent increase takes effect in 28 days. So we'd need to have an agreement in place before then if you want to avoid eviction. The morning rush began in earnest, and their conversation was interrupted by a steady stream of customers. But as Simone worked, she found herself stealing glances at Jonathan. He remained at his table, reading the newspaper and occasionally making notes on his phone. He waved goodbye when he left for work, just like always. But nothing felt the same as before. The quiet man who ordered black coffee was actually a millionaire who could solve all her problems with what amounted to pocket change for him. The question was, what did he really want in return? During her lunch break, Simone researched Pierce Development online. The company had an impressive portfolio of successful projects and a reputation for quality construction. Jonathan's biography described him as an innovative leader who was expanding the company's focus to include community-centered development. She also found several articles about Pierce Development's impact on local neighborhoods. Some praised the company for bringing jobs and investment to underutilized areas. Others criticized their projects for displacing existing businesses and residents. By closing time, Simone had reached a tentative conclusion. Jonathan's offer might be her only realistic option for saving the cafe, but she needed to understand exactly what she would be agreeing to. Tomorrow she would ask him the hard questions about his expectations and motivations. As she locked up the cafe, Simone reflected on how much her life had changed in just 2 days. Sunday night she had been facing the end of her dream. Tuesday night she was considering a partnership with a millionaire who claimed to care about her community-focused vision. She didn't know yet whether Jonathan Pierce was her salvation or simply another threat to everything she had built. But she knew she had to find out. Tomorrow would bring answers one way or another. Wednesday morning brought the biggest decision of Simone's life. She had spent the previous evening making lists of questions, concerns, and potential scenarios. She had even called her best friend from college for advice, though she couldn't bring herself to reveal the full scope of Jonathan's offer. When Jonathan arrived at 7:30, Simone had his coffee ready and a quiet corner table reserved for their conversation. The morning rush could wait. "I've been thinking about your proposal," she said without preamble as they sat down. "And? I have questions. A lot of them." Jonathan nodded. "Ask me anything." Simone consulted the notes she had written on a napkin. "First, what exactly would you want from this partnership? And please be honest about your motivations, not just the nice things you think I want to hear." Jonathan appreciated her directness. "Honestly, I want to be part of something that matters. I've spent 10 years building structures without building community. I want to use my business skills and resources to help create the kind of place I wish existed more often in the world." That sounds very idealistic for a CEO. Maybe it is. But idealism that produces results is just good business with a conscience. Simone made a note on her napkin. "What kind of return on investment would you expect?" "I'd expect the cafe to become profitable enough to sustain itself and pay reasonable dividends. I'm not looking for huge returns, but I also wouldn't want to subsidize losses indefinitely. This needs to work as a business, not just as a charitable endeavor." "How much control would you want over daily operations?" "Almost none. You understand this community and this business better than I ever could. My role would be to provide capital, business strategy advice when requested, and support for expansion if that becomes relevant." Simone checked another question off her list. "What happens if we disagree about something major?" "The partnership agreement would specify that you have final authority on all matters related to customer service, menu, staffing, and cafe culture. I'd have input on major financial decisions, lease negotiations, and expansion plans. For anything we can't resolve through discussion, we'd have a mediator." "What happens if one of us wants out of the partnership?" "We'd include buyout clauses that protect both of us. If you wanted to end the partnership, you'd have the right to buy out my share at fair market value. If I wanted out, you'd have first right of refusal before I could sell to anyone else." Simone was impressed by how thoroughly he had thought through the practical details. "You've done this before. I've structured a lot of business partnerships. The key is making sure everyone's interests are aligned and protected." The door chimed as early customers began arriving. Simone glanced toward the counter, torn between continuing their conversation and serving her regulars. "Go ahead," Jonathan said. "I'm not going anywhere." For the next hour, Simone managed the morning rush while thinking about Jonathan's answers. Everything he had said sounded reasonable, even generous. But she had learned to be suspicious of offers that seemed too good to be true. When the customers thinned out, she rejoined Jonathan at their corner table. "I have one more question," she said. "The most important one." "Go ahead. What happens to you if this doesn't work? If the cafe fails despite your investment, if the partnership doesn't succeed, if I turn out to be a terrible business partner?" Jonathan smiled. Then I'll have lost some money and learned some valuable lessons. I can afford the financial loss, and I can't afford to pass up the chance to be part of what you've created here. That's it? No consequences, no pressure, no hidden expectations. Simone, I make more money in a month than this investment represents. If the worst thing that happens is that I lose money trying to save something I care about, I'll consider it money well spent. Simone set down her napkin and looked directly at Jonathan. Okay. I accept your offer. Jonathan's face lit up with genuine happiness. Really? Really? But I have conditions. Name them. First, we put everything in writing. I want a lawyer to review the partnership agreement before I sign anything. Absolutely. I'll have my legal team draft an initial agreement, and you should definitely have your own lawyer review it. Second, I want to start small. Let's try this partnership for 1 year and see how it works before making any long-term commitments. That's smart. We can include an option to extend or modify the agreement after the first year. Third, I want transparency about your other business activities. If Pierce Development is involved in projects that could affect this neighborhood, I want to know about them. Jonathan nodded seriously. Fair enough. And Simone? I want you to know that this partnership might actually influence how Pierce Development approaches other projects. Working with you could help us become the kind of company that builds communities rather than destroying them. That would be wonderful, but let's focus on saving this cafe first. They shook hands across the small table, and Simone felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had been carrying for months. The immediate crisis was over. The cafe would survive. How are you feeling about this partnership? Do you think Simone made the right choice accepting Jonathan's offer? The next few chapters will determine whether this decision leads to the happily ever after both of them are hoping for. If you're invested in their story, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in Simone's position? So what happens next? Simone asked. Next, I call my lawyer and have her start drafting the partnership agreement. I'll also set up a meeting with your landlord to discuss the rent situation. You can do that? I have experience negotiating commercial leases. Sometimes landlords are willing to be more reasonable when they're dealing with someone who understands the legal and financial implications of their decisions. Simone felt another wave of relief. She had been dreading the conversation with Morrison Property Management, but having an experienced negotiator handle it sounded like a blessing. How long will all this take? The legal paperwork might take a week or two, but I can arrange for immediate interim funding if needed. Your rent increase doesn't take effect for 3.5 weeks, so we have time to do this properly. As they talked through timelines and next steps, Simone found herself studying Jonathan's face with new appreciation. This morning he had gone from being a regular customer to being her business partner. The man who had been part of her daily routine for 3 weeks was now going to be part of her future. Jonathan, she said as their conversation wound down, why is this so important to you? I mean, I understand everything you've said about community and meaningful work, but there has to be more to it. Jonathan was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Do you remember the first Friday night I stayed for the music? Yes. That night, watching you move through the room, seeing how you made everyone feel welcome and valued, it was the first time in years I felt like I was seeing how life could be lived differently. Better. What do you mean? I've been successful by most measures, but I've also been lonely. I've had business relationships but not friendships. I've accumulated things but not experiences. I've built buildings but not connections. Jonathan paused, looking around the cafe at the familiar faces and warm atmosphere. This place showed me what I've been missing. And you showed me what it looks like to build a life around service and community rather than just profit and achievement. Simone felt touched by his honesty. That's a lovely thing to say. I'm not trying to be romantic or dramatic, Jonathan said with a smile. I'm trying to be truthful. This partnership isn't just about saving your cafe. It's about me learning to be part of something bigger than myself. As Jonathan left for work and Simone returned to serving customers, both of them felt a sense of anticipation about the future. The partnership would change both their lives, though neither could predict exactly how. For Simone, it meant security, opportunity, and the chance to expand her vision of what the cafe could become. For Jonathan, it meant purpose, connection, and the possibility of building a legacy that mattered. They had made their decision based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine care for the community they both wanted to serve. Now they had to see if their partnership would fulfill the promise they saw in each other. The future of Sunrise Cafe and their own relationship would depend on how well they could work together to build something neither could create alone. News of the partnership spread through the cafe community faster than Simone had expected. By Friday morning, Mrs. Chen was asking pointed questions about the nice young man who's been helping with the business troubles. And the college students had heard rumors about investment money that would keep their favorite study spot open. Simone decided transparency was the best approach. She posted a handwritten sign next to the register that read, "Thanks to a community-minded investor, Sunrise Café will remain open and growing. Thank you all for your continued support of local business." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Regular customers hugged her when they heard the news. People who had been coming to the cafe for years shared stories about what the place meant to them. New customers arrived after hearing from friends that this was a cafe worth supporting. Jonathan arrived to find the busiest morning rush Simone had experienced in months. "This is incredible," he said when he finally made it to the counter. "I had to wait in line for 10 minutes. Word got out about the partnership," Simone explained, beaming as she prepared his coffee. "People are so excited that we're staying open. Have you thought about what you want to do with all this new energy?" "Actually, yes. I've been thinking about the conversations we had about expansion and improvements." They agreed to meet after the morning rush to discuss specific plans. When the cafe quieted down, Simone showed Jonathan a notebook where she had been sketching ideas. "I've always wanted to do more community programming," she said, flipping through pages of notes. "Cooking classes, small business workshops, art exhibitions that last longer than a month. But I never had the space or resources." Jonathan studied her drawings and lists. "Some of these ideas could generate additional revenue while serving the community. Cooking classes especially. Do you think people would be interested?" "Are you kidding? You have customers asking for your recipes every day. A monthly cooking class featuring your most popular dishes would probably sell out." Simone felt excited about the possibilities. "What about the business workshops? I know so many people who dream of starting their own ventures but don't know where to begin." "I could help with those," Jonathan offered. "Between the two of us, we have experience with both the creative and business sides of entrepreneurship." They spent an hour developing concrete plans for expanding the cafe's programming. Cooking classes on weekend afternoons, business workshops on weekday evenings, extended art exhibitions with opening night receptions, book club meetings with featured local authors. "This is starting to feel like more than a cafe," Jonathan observed. "It's becoming a community center." "That's exactly what I've always wanted it to be," Simone said. "A place where people don't just grab coffee and leave, but where they come to learn, create, and connect with their neighbors." The following week brought a steady stream of positive developments. Jonathan's lawyer completed the partnership agreement, which Simone's own legal counsel approved with minor modifications. The meeting with Morrison Property Management resulted in a compromise. Instead of a 60% rent increase, they agreed to a 25% increase with a 5-year lease that included annual increases capped at 3%. "How did you get them to negotiate?" Simone asked when Jonathan reported the results. "I pointed out the legal vulnerabilities in their original notice and suggested that a reasonable compromise would serve everyone's interests better than a lengthy court battle." "You didn't threaten them, did you?" "I didn't have to. They knew they had overreached and they knew I had the resources to fight them if necessary. Sometimes the threat is implied rather than stated." With the rent crisis resolved and the partnership formalized, Simone felt free to focus on improvements and expansion. The first priority was replacing the aging espresso machine. Jonathan arranged for the delivery and installation of a top-of-the-line commercial machine that would improve both the quality and consistency of the coffee service. The day the new machine arrived, regular customers gathered to watch Simone test its capabilities. The difference in coffee quality was immediately apparent, earning applause from the assembled crowd. "This is the best coffee you've ever made," declared Mr. Patterson, a retired professor who had been a daily customer for 3 years. "And that's saying something," added Mrs. Chin, "because your coffee was already wonderful." Simone demonstrated the machine's steaming wand by creating elaborate latte art for several customers. Word spread on social media, and by afternoon the cafe was busier than it had been since the partnership announcement. "I think we need to talk about hiring additional staff," Jonathan suggested during a quiet moment. "You can't handle all this increased business alone." "I've been thinking about that too," Simone said. "I know 2 people who might be perfect. College graduates who are passionate about food service and community engagement." Within a week, Simone had hired Jennifer, a recent sociology graduate with cafe experience, and Marcus, a culinary school graduate who specialized in pastries and baked goods. Both understood the cafe's community-focused mission and were excited to be part of its growth. The first cooking class was scheduled for the following Saturday afternoon. Simone planned to teach her grandmother's recipe for sweet potato pie, along with techniques for making perfect pie crust from scratch. She had expected maybe 8 or 10 people to sign up. 25 people registered within 3 days. We're going to need a bigger space for these classes, Simone realized as she looked at the registration list. What about the empty storefront next door? Jonathan suggested. It's been vacant for 6 months. We might be able to negotiate a short-term lease for weekend programming. The idea of expanding into additional space felt simultaneously thrilling and terrifying to Simone. 6 months ago, she had been struggling to pay rent for one location. Now she was considering leasing a second space for classes and events. Are you sure we're not moving too fast? She asked Jonathan. Growth always feels fast when you're in the middle of it, he replied. But everything we're doing builds on what you've already created here. We're not changing the cafe's essential character. We're just giving it more room to flourish. The Saturday cooking class was a tremendous success. Participants ranged from teenagers to retirees, all eager to learn Simone's techniques and recipes. The atmosphere was warm and collaborative, with experienced cooks helping beginners and everyone sharing stories about family food traditions. This feels like the dinner parties my grandmother used to host, said one participant, an elderly woman who had recently moved to the neighborhood. That's exactly what I was hoping for, Simone replied. Food has a way of bringing people together across all kinds of differences. By the end of the class, several participants had signed up for the following month's session on homemade bread baking. Others were asking about the business workshop series that was scheduled to begin the following week. As Simone cleaned up after the class, with Jonathan helping to wash dishes and stack chairs, she realized how much her life had changed in just a few weeks. The cafe was busier than ever, the community programming was exceeding her wildest expectations, and she had a business partner who shared her values and supported her vision. Thank you, she said as they finished cleaning. For what? For believing in this place. For taking a chance on partnership with someone you barely knew. For helping me turn a dream into something even bigger than I imagined. Jonathan smiled. Thank you for showing me what community really means. This partnership has been the best decision I've made in years. As they stood in the cafe surrounded by the evidence of their successful collaboration, new equipment, full class rosters, happy customer testimonials, both Simone and Jonathan realized that their professional partnership had evolved into something deeper. They were building more than a successful business. They were creating a model for how commerce and community could support each other, and they were discovering that their shared values extended far beyond their work together. The question neither was ready to address directly was whether their partnership might become something more personal as well as professional. But the foundation of trust, respect, and shared purpose they had built together was certainly strong enough to support whatever might develop between them in the future. The success of the cafe's expansion brought Simone and Jonathan together more often and for longer periods. What had begun as brief morning conversations evolved into extended planning sessions, working dinners, and collaborative problem-solving that often lasted well into the evening. 3 weeks after the first cooking class, they sat in the cafe at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, surrounded by spreadsheets, vendor catalogs, and architectural sketches for the adjacent space they had decided to lease. I can't believe we're actually doing this, Simone said, reviewing the plans for what would become the Sunrise Community Kitchen. Having second thoughts? Jonathan asked, looking up from his laptop where he was researching commercial kitchen equipment. Not second thoughts exactly. More like, wonder that it's really happening. 6 weeks ago I was afraid I'd lose everything. Now we're expanding into a second location. Jonathan smiled. That's what happens when you combine good ideas with adequate resources and a lot of hard work. They had been working together for 3 hours, and Simone was struck by how comfortable their collaboration had become. Jonathan never tried to take over or dismiss her ideas. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions that helped her think through implications and possibilities she might have missed. What are you thinking about? He asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Just, this partnership. How well we work together. I wasn't sure what to expect when we started. What did you expect? Simone considered her answer. I guess I was afraid you'd want to change everything about the cafe. Make it more corporate, more focused on profit than community. And instead, you've helped me do everything I always wanted to do but never thought was possible. Jonathan closed his laptop and gave her his full attention. Can I tell you something? Of course. Working with you has been the most satisfying professional experience of my life. Not just because the cafe is successful, but because of how you approach every decision. You always think about the human impact first. That's how my grandmother taught me to think. She must have been an amazing woman. She was. She used to say that business without heart is just selfishness dressed up in fancy clothes. Jonathan laughed. I wish I had known her. She sounds like she would have had some choice words about the way I used to run my company. How did you used to run it? Efficiently. Profitably. With very little consideration for anything that couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. Simone studied his face in the warm light of the cafe. What changed? You did. This place did. Seeing what business could look like when it's built around service instead of extraction. They were sitting closer together than usual, leaning over the same set of architectural plans. Simone became aware of the intimacy of the moment, the quiet cafe, the late hour, the easy conversation about things that mattered to both of them. Jonathan, she said softly. Yes. Are we still just talking about business? He met her eyes directly. I don't think we've been talking just about business for a while now. The admission hung in the air between them. Simone felt her heart rate increase as she realized they were approaching territory they hadn't explicitly acknowledged before. What does that mean for our partnership? She asked. I don't know, Jonathan said honestly. But I know I don't want to pretend anymore that working with you is just about the cafe. What is it about? It's about the fact that I look forward to seeing you every morning more than anything else in my day. It's about how talking with you makes me feel like the person I want to be. It's about how your laugh makes me forget everything that was bothering me 5 minutes before. Simone felt warmth spreading through her chest. That sounds like I'm falling in love with you? Yes, it does sound like that. The simple honesty of his statement took Simone's breath away. She had been aware of her own growing feelings for weeks but hadn't been sure if they were reciprocated. I've been trying not to complicate our professional relationship, she said. And how's that working out? Simone laughed. Not very well. I think about you when you're not here. I save up things to tell you throughout the day. I've started wearing my favorite clothes on days when I know we'll be working late together. So what do we do about it? I don't know. I've never been in business with someone I had feelings for. Jonathan reached across the table and took her hand. Maybe we don't have to figure everything out tonight. Maybe we just acknowledge what's happening and see where it leads. Simone looked down at their joined hands, then back at his face. What if it doesn't work out? What if mixing business and personal feelings ruins everything we've built? What if it makes everything we've built even better? You're very optimistic for a businessman. I'm very optimistic about you. About us. Simone felt the last of her resistance melting away. The truth was, she had been falling for Jonathan since their second week of morning conversations. His kindness, his genuine interest in her ideas, his willingness to use his resources to support rather than control everything about their partnership had shown her the kind of person he really was. Okay, she said. Okay, what? Okay, let's see where this leads. Jonathan squeezed her hand gently. Are you sure? I'm sure that I don't want to spend any more energy pretending I don't have feelings for you. I'm sure that working with you has been one of the best experiences of my life. And I'm sure that I want to find out what happens next. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, hands still joined across the table covered with business plans and architectural drawings. The contrast struck them both, discussing commercial kitchen layouts while acknowledging they were falling in love. This is probably not how most people transition from business partners to whatever we're becoming, Simone observed. Nothing about our relationship has been typical so far, Jonathan replied. Why start now? Good point. Besides, I like that we built trust and friendship and shared purpose before we admitted to romantic feelings. It's a solid foundation. Very solid, Simone agreed. Built on mutual respect and compatible values. And excellent coffee. Simone laughed. Don't forget the excellent coffee. As they finally packed up their paperwork and prepared to lock up the cafe, both Simone and Jonathan felt the excitement of a new beginning layered onto the satisfaction of professional success. Their partnership had saved the cafe, exceeded their business projections, and created meaningful community programming. Now it was evolving into something personal as well as professional. Jonathan, Simone said as they stood by the door, keys in her hand. Yes. I'm really glad you knocked on my door that night. I'm really glad you let me in. They shared their first kiss standing in the doorway of Sunrise Café, surrounded by the lingering aroma of coffee and fresh pastries, with the warm lights of the community they had built together glowing behind them. It felt like the perfect beginning to whatever came next. 2 months into their romantic relationship, Simone and Jonathan faced their first serious challenge as both business partners and a couple. It arrived in the form of Marcus Williamson, a local developer with a reputation for aggressive business tactics and a personal grudge against Jonathan. Williamson had been bidding against Pierce Development on several major projects over the past year, losing most of them due to what he claimed were Jonathan's unfair advantages and insider connections. When he learned about Jonathan's investment in Sunrise Café, he saw an opportunity for revenge. The first sign of trouble came on a busy Friday morning when Simone noticed a man in an expensive suit taking photos of the cafe from across the street. He wasn't being subtle about it, and when she waved, he quickly got into a black sedan and drove away. "That's odd," she mentioned to Jonathan when he arrived for his morning coffee. "What kind of photos was he taking?" "It looked like he was documenting the exterior, the signage, maybe the customer traffic." "Do you think he's from the city? Some kind of health or safety inspection?" Jonathan frowned. "I'll look into it." The following Monday, Simone received a visit from someone identifying herself as Sarah Mitchell from the local business journal. She asked to interview Simone about her partnership with prominent developer Jonathan Pierce and its impact on the neighborhood. "It's wonderful that successful business people are choosing to support local enterprises," the reporter said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Tell me, how did you and Mr. Pierce first meet?" Simone answered the questions carefully, focusing on the cafe's community mission and the positive impact of the partnership. But something about the interview felt off. The reporter seemed more interested in the personal relationship between Simone and Jonathan than in the business aspects of their collaboration. "Are you and Mr. Pierce romantically involved?" the reporter asked directly. "I don't see how that's relevant to a story about local business," Simone replied. "Our readers are always interested in the human side of business stories. And there are rumors." "I think we're done here," Simone said, standing up from the table. The reporter left, but not before taking several more photos of the cafe interior and exterior. That afternoon, Jonathan called Simone with concerning news. "I think I know who's behind these inquiries. Marcus Williamson has been asking questions about our partnership around town." "Who's Marcus Williamson?" "A competitor who's lost several major contracts to my company recently. He's not known for taking rejection gracefully." "What kind of questions is he asking?" "About the terms of our partnership, about whether city regulations are being properly followed, about the nature of our personal relationship." Simone felt a chill of anxiety. "Is he trying to cause problems for the cafe?" "He's fishing for anything he can use to embarrass me or damage my reputation. Unfortunately, you might get caught in the crossfire." "What should we do?" "For now, nothing. Keep running the cafe normally, continue our expansion plans, and don't let him intimidate you. I'll handle Williamson directly." But Williamson proved to be more persistent and creative than either of them expected. Over the next 2 weeks, Sunrise Café faced a series of minor but disruptive problems. A health inspector arrived unannounced for an extremely detailed inspection. A building code official found violations in the adjacent space they were renovating that required expensive fixes. The fire department conducted a surprise safety inspection during the lunch rush. Each inspection found minor issues that needed to be addressed, but nothing serious enough to shut down operations. It felt like harassment disguised as regulatory oversight. "This is not normal," Simone said after the third unexpected inspection in 2 weeks. "Other small businesses don't get this much attention from city officials." "No, they don't," Jonathan agreed grimly. "Williamson has connections throughout the city bureaucracy. He's calling in favors to make life difficult for us." "Can't we file a complaint? Report him for harassment?" "It's hard to prove unless he does something overtly illegal. Right now, he's working through official channels, even if his motives are personal." The stress began to affect both the cafe's operations and Simone and Jonathan's relationship. Simone found herself snapping at employees over minor mistakes. Jonathan became distracted during their evening planning sessions, constantly checking his phone for messages from lawyers and city contacts. "I feel like we're under attack," Simone said one evening as they sat in the empty cafe reviewing the latest round of compliance requirements. "We are under attack," Jonathan replied. "But we're not going to let him win. What if this never stops? What if he keeps finding new ways to harass us indefinitely? Then we outlast him. We keep doing good work, serving the community, and building something he can't tear down." Simone admired Jonathan's determination, but she could see the toll the situation was taking on him as well. He looked tired, stressed, and angry in a way she had never seen before. "This is my fault," he said suddenly. "You wouldn't be dealing with any of this if you hadn't partnered with me." "Don't say that. Our partnership has been the best thing that's happened to this cafe. But it's also brought you problems you never would have had otherwise." Simone reached across the table and took his hand. Jonathan, listen to me. Every good thing in life comes with challenges. That doesn't mean the good things aren't worth having. Even when the challenges affect people you care about? Especially then. Because that's when you find out what you're really made of. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the cafe door. Through the glass, they could see a tall, well-dressed man with silver hair and an expensive suit. That's Williamson, Jonathan said quietly. What does he want? Only one way to find out. Jonathan unlocked the door and stepped outside, closing it behind him so that Simone was protected inside the cafe. She could see them talking but couldn't hear the conversation through the glass. The discussion lasted about 10 minutes. Jonathan remained calm throughout, but Simone could see the tension in his posture. Williamson gestured frequently and seemed to be speaking in an aggressive, intimidating manner. Finally, Williamson walked away and Jonathan came back inside. What did he want? Simone asked immediately. He offered to make all the regulatory problems go away if I withdraw from 3 current development projects and agree not to bid on 2 upcoming ones. That's extortion. Yes, it is. And it confirms that he's behind all the inspections and harassment. What did you tell him? Jonathan smiled grimly. I told him that I don't negotiate with bullies, and that his tactics are only making me more determined to succeed. How did he respond to that? He said things might get more difficult for both of us before they get better. Simone felt a flash of anger. He threatened us? He implied it. But Simone, I want you to know something. Whatever happens, I'm not backing down. I won't let him use you to get to me. Good, Simone said firmly. Because I'm not backing down either. This cafe represents everything I believe in, and our partnership represents everything I hope for. If he wants a fight, he's got one. Jonathan looked at her with admiration and love. Are you sure? This could get worse before it gets better. I'm sure. We built something beautiful together, and we're not going to let someone tear it down because he's bitter about losing business deals. What if the harassment continues? What if he finds ways to really hurt the cafe's business? Then we'll deal with it together. That's what partners do. Jonathan pulled her into his arms, holding her close in the quiet cafe. I love you, he said softly. I love you too. And I believe in what we're building here. Not just the business but the life we're creating together. Even if that life comes with complications you never asked for? Especially then. Because the best things in life are worth fighting for. As they locked up the cafe and walked home together through the quiet streets, both Simone and Jonathan felt the strength that comes from facing challenges as a united team. Williamson's harassment was serious, but it had also clarified what mattered most to them. They had found love, built success, and created something meaningful together. Whatever came next, they would face it with the confidence that comes from knowing you're fighting for the right reasons with the right person by your side. 6 months after Marcus Williamson's attempt to intimidate them into submission, Sunrise Café and the Sunrise Community Kitchen were thriving beyond anything Simone had imagined when she first opened her small coffee shop 5 years earlier. The harassment campaign had ultimately backfired on Williamson. When his tactics became too obvious and aggressive, several city officials reported his behavior to the mayor's office. An investigation revealed that he had been using city inspectors to harass businesses connected to his competitors, a clear violation of ethics rules and possibly law. Williamson faced public censure, lost several city contracts, and found himself the subject of unflattering newspaper coverage. The Business Journal article about Simone and Jonathan's partnership ran with a positive angle, focusing on their community development model and innovative approach to local business support. Sometimes the best response to a bully is to keep doing good work until the truth becomes obvious, Jonathan had observed as they read the favorable coverage. Now, on a sunny Saturday morning in early spring, Simone stood in the original cafe watching the bustling activity that had become their new normal. Jennifer was behind the main counter, efficiently serving the line of customers that stretched to the door. Marcus was in the kitchen preparing fresh pastries for both locations. Next door, the community kitchen was hosting 3 simultaneous events: a bread-making class for beginners, a small business workshop for aspiring entrepreneurs, and a planning meeting for the neighborhood association that had formed to advocate for community-centered development. It's like watching a small town square, said Mrs. Chin, who was sitting at her usual table with a friend she had brought to see the cafe. All this activity and connection happening in one place. Simone smiled and refilled Mrs. Chen's teacup. That's exactly what we were hoping to create. The door chimed and Jonathan entered, carrying a box of flyers and looking pleased about something. Good news, he announced as he approached the counter. What kind of good news? Simone asked. The city council approved our proposal for the pilot program. We're going to be the model for community-centered development in 3 other neighborhoods. Simone's eyes widened. Over the past few months, she and Jonathan had been working with city planners to develop a replicable model for how private development could support existing communities rather than displacing them. Their partnership had become a case study in successful collaboration between local businesses and larger investors. That's incredible, she said. When do we start? The first neighborhood wants to meet with us next month. We'd help them identify local businesses that could benefit from partnership and expansion, then connect them with investors who share our values. You realize what this means, don't you? Simone said, looking around the busy cafe. What? It means we've accidentally become consultants. Jonathan laughed. The best kind. The kind who learned by doing rather than by going to business school. Speaking of doing, Simone said, I have some news of my own. Good news, I hope? Very good news. The James Foundation wants to fund a full documentary about community-based business development, with our partnership as the central story. A documentary about us? A documentary about what we've built together. The cafe, the community programming, the development model, the way business can serve community instead of extracting from it. Jonathan shook his head in amazement. When I knocked on your door 8 months ago, did you imagine any of this? Not in a million years. I was just hoping to save my little cafe. And instead we saved your cafe, launched a community movement, influenced city policy, and fell in love. Simone came around the counter and took his hands. Not bad for a night's work. Not bad at all. They were interrupted by applause from the customers in the cafe. Simone looked around, confused, until she noticed that everyone was looking toward the community kitchen next door. Through the connecting door, they could see that the bread-making class had just finished, and participants were showing off their completed loaves. The small business workshop was wrapping up with handshakes and exchanged business cards. The neighborhood association meeting had ended with what appeared to be enthusiastic agreement about some new initiative. This is what success looks like, Jonathan said quietly, watching the various groups interact and cross-pollinate ideas. This is what community looks like, Simone corrected. Success is just what happens when community is supported and allowed to grow. As the morning progressed into afternoon, Simone and Jonathan found themselves with a rare moment of quiet. The lunch rush was over, the classes had ended, and Jennifer was handling the few remaining customers with practiced ease. They sat at their favorite table by the window, looking out at Maple Street, which had transformed significantly over the past months. 3 other small businesses had opened, inspired by the cafe's success. The empty storefront across the street was now a bookstore that hosted readings and community discussions. The old flower shop had expanded into event planning and wedding coordination. Remember when you were worried about gentrification pushing out local businesses? Jonathan asked. I still worry about it, but this feels different. The new businesses are owned by people who live here, who understand the community. That's because they're following the model you created. Business growth that serves existing community rather than replacing it. Simone leaned against Jonathan's shoulder, feeling the contentment that comes from work that aligns with your values. What do you think happens next? Next we get married, Jonathan said casually. Simone sat up straight. Excuse me? Jonathan smiled and pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. I said next we get married. If you'll have me. Simone stared at the box, then at Jonathan's face, then back at the box. Are you proposing to me in the cafe? I'm proposing to you in the place where we met, where we fell in love, where we built our life together. Is there anywhere else I should be proposing? No, Simone said, tears starting to form in her eyes. There's nowhere else I'd rather be proposed to. Jonathan opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring with a stone that caught the afternoon light beautifully. Simone Washington, will you marry me? Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, absolutely, completely yes. As Jonathan slipped the ring onto her finger, the customers in the cafe began applauding again. Mrs. Chen was crying happy tears. Jennifer was taking photos with her phone. Marcus emerged from the kitchen with a bottle of champagne that he claimed to have been keeping for exactly this occasion. How long have you been planning this? Simone asked as Jonathan kissed her. Since the night you accepted my business proposal, he replied. I knew then that I wanted to spend my life with you. Even though you barely knew me? I knew everything I needed to know. You were kind, brave, hardworking, and committed to making the world better. What else could I possibly need to know? Simone looked around the cafe at their friends and customers celebrating with them, Then at the community kitchen where people were still gathered in conversation. Then at the street outside where other small businesses were serving their own communities. "I love you," she said to Jonathan. "I love you too. And I love what we've built together. What do you think we'll build next?" "I don't know," Jonathan said, taking her hand and admiring the ring that sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. "But I know it will be something beautiful." As they sat in Sunrise Café surrounded by the community they had nurtured together, Simone and Jonathan felt the deep satisfaction that comes from using your gifts to serve something larger than yourself. They had saved a small business, created a movement, influenced policy, and found love. Most importantly, they had learned that the best dreams are the ones you build together, one day at a time, with kindness as your guide and hope as your fuel. The afternoon sun streamed through the cafe windows, illuminating the faces of people who had found not just good coffee and community programming, but a model for how life could be lived with purpose, connection, and love. It was the perfect beginning to whatever came next.